This is Sports Spectrum, the sports and faith podcast where we bring Jesus into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
Hey guys, welcome to Sports Spectrum. I am Jason Romano. Today on the show, we welcome best-selling author and speaker Jon Gordon. Before we get to our friend Jon, I want to tell you about IJM, our sponsors today, the International Justice Mission, helping to protect more than 150 million people from violence across the world. If you want to join the fight to end slavery in our lifetime, visit ijm.org/TF, become a freedom partner, and join that fight against violence and oppression. ijm.org/TF. Jon Gordon is our guest today on Sports Spectrum. Welcoming back Jon to the show. He's been on our podcast previously a couple times, and now he's got a brand new book out, book number 22 in Jon Gordon's array of books, and it's called The Garden, a spiritual fable about ways to overcome fear, anxiety, and stress, releasing June 30th, 2020. If you know that name, Jon Gordon, you know he's one of the leadership gurus in this country. His Positive University podcast is heard by so many, and his books have been read by millions upon millions of people, including bestseller The Energy Bus, The Power of a Positive Team, Power of Positive Leadership, and my favorite, The Carpenter, which has really been an influence on my life. Jon is all about leadership and doing it in an amazing way, really about servant leadership, giving back, serving others. Jon has been a great friend, a great mentor, and a great example of what servant leadership is all about. So whenever we can get Jon Gordon on the show, I always say yes, because I learn something new from him every day, and I think you will too. Today he's going to talk about the 5 Ds that get in our way of success, and it's featured again in his new book, The Garden, releasing June 30th. Take a listen to Jon Gordon, best-selling author and speaker, joining us here today on Sports Spectrum. Jon Gordon, welcome back to Sports Spectrum. How are you, buddy?
Man, I'm good, Jason. Great to be with you. And I really appreciate you. I appreciate your friendship. You are one of the best guys I know on the planet.
I appreciate that. That means a lot to me. And speaking of the planet, we are on, month 4, I feel like, of the pandemic. We're taping this in the middle of June. It's going to release in a week or two. And you are a speaker who travels across the planet and across the country, certainly, to share your message, and a great message. And suddenly nobody's allowed to travel. So my question to you is, because the books that you've written all include about being positive, staying positive, as my shirt says, that your shirt that you're wearing says right now. So does negativity ever creep into Jon Gordon's world during a time like this with a pandemic?
Of course not. I am positive all the time.
That's what I was expecting. Thank you, Jon.
I am kidding. When it first hit,
yeah,
it rocked my world. It really did. I found myself going towards the pessimistic route. I mean, I am naturally pessimistic. I'm a pessimistic optimist. So at first I get negative, but then I find this faith, this eternal hope, this belief and trust in God that somehow, some way, he will provide a way. And so at first I got really negative. And then I said to myself, is this going to help me create my future? Is this going to help me help others? Because that's my job. Yeah. In essence, I had to read my own books and get my mind right. And I did. I was so faithful after that. It's been such an incredible time because God has brought me so much closer to him. I've had to rely on him. I've had to go back to that rookie mindset when I wasn't getting paid early on, because I've lost a lot of money during this time, a lot of events. And I have a team. I didn't let go of anyone, had a team, still taking care of them, no revenues coming in. We have trainings that we had to cancel. It's been a really big deal for us in terms of how it's hit us, but it's also hit a lot of people, but people don't really think of how it hits a speaker or his business, right? So really affected by it. But at the same time, I found myself being more faithful, more trusting, really looking forward to how we were going to adapt, how we're going to innovate. The rookie mindset, as I said, I went back to that, just going out there and serving others. People reached out, hey, can you speak to my team? Can you do this? Can you do that? And I was like, yes, yes, yes. I said yes to everyone. I helped anyone who asked. I didn't charge. And it was really this kind of thing where people said, what's your budget? I even said, whatever you want to pay me at times, if they were, a big company and so forth. Yeah. And it was amazing how just by doing that, I was energized. I felt great in doing it. And then strangely, all this other business actually came in during this time. Like a few events would come in, a few events here would come in, a few events would come there. I just saw how faithful God is. Like, you do his work, you focus on him, and you trust in him, and he provides. You invest in the root, and he will provide the fruit. I'm not saying, okay, you have faith and God makes your life great. My faith in God doesn't make life easier. What I have found is it makes me stronger. So to answer your question, a long answer, yeah, I went towards the negative, but then I really found that eternal faith and optimism and hope, that trust in God. And it's now even greater than ever. I don't know what the future holds, but I know that my job is to win today. If I can win each day, I'll win the future. And the goal is to win each day.
Did you find, because of the books, especially the ones of the power of positive leadership, the power of a positive team, did you see, this is kind of a weird question maybe, but did you see those books sell more during a pandemic because people were looking for some positivity during a time that featured so much negativity?
My publisher said that my books have held pretty steady. At first, they went down a little bit, but then people started buying the books, and especially the Energy Bus. The Energy Bus hit the bestseller list like 3 times during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And the book was written in 2006, came out in 2007. So it's a message that still is resonating with people today. Overall, I believe book sales are down for everyone. But at the same time, yeah, I think positivity and positive books with a positive message are something that people are looking for during this time. And we all need it, right? Positive people are the ones who are able to create positive results. And by the way, we're not talking about Pollyanna positive. You know that.
Absolutely.
We're talking about real optimism, real faith. This is not about seeing the world through rose-colored glasses. This is knowing that you have the power to overcome the thorns. This is about trust and just taking it one day at a time with trust and faith.
Take me into your faith a little bit more. You said that you've never felt closer to God in many ways because of this time during the pandemic where you've had to trust in him, maybe harder than you've ever had to trust in him, right? So walk me through that a little bit and what that looked like for you. I know there was a wonderful conversation that you did with Erwin McManus during this time about faith, and it was specifically diving deeper into Jesus and the questions that some people might have. And I'm sure that was an encouragement to you as well. But take me a little bit more into what that means for you to kind of grow closer to the Lord during this time.
I believe it's more trust. It's more surrender. It's really knowing that he is in control and I'm not. You get so caught up in your busyness and you're going to speak and you're flying on planes and you're going from one event to the other. And you know that you rely on God, but sometimes you don't really feel God's presence. And it was during this time where things became still, where things slowed down. I wasn't on the plane anymore, where I really felt God's presence even more. I just felt his hand on my life. I felt my trust growing even greater than it already was. And my faith was going deeper. It was almost like when you're in a drought and the roots of a tree just start to spread out to find more water. Through this drought, like my roots were spreading out and going deeper. And then God was actually at the source of that, replenishing me. And then from there, now I know I'm stronger going forward. Just as that tree is now stronger having gone through that drought, I'm now stronger having gone through this. And I'm sure there's going to be more droughts in the future. We don't know what the future holds. We don't know what's next. Yeah. That's the thing that's comforting. I don't think I've ever experienced anything this bad. I don't think we have. This strange, this weird. I mean, I lost my job during the .com crash, which is actually when my faith was born. So that began my faith journey. It's interesting. It's where I began my faith journey. It's where I failed during the .com crash, where I actually crumbled. Yeah. But that would pave the way to be strong during this time, to be a light for others during this time. So I know that whatever happens, whatever comes my way, I'm ready for it.
Jon Gordon's our guest here on Sports Spectrum. He's got a new book. It's called The Garden, a spiritual fable about ways to overcome fear, anxiety, and stress. It's almost like you plan to write a book during the pandemic and all that's going on with the racial unrest and other things going on in the world, because fear, anxiety, stress, we're seeing a lot of that. So tell us about the book, The Garden. What number book, by the way, is this?
I think it's 22.
Nice. Tell us about it.
This is how amazing God is. Here I am writing relationship grit with my wife. We finished Christmas Day. We finished the book Christmas Day.
Yeah.
And then I thought, should I write the next one? I wanted to write about the 5 Ds that the enemy uses to sabotage us. I didn't know how I was going to share the 5 Ds. Taking a walk, and it hit me. The garden. Had a visual for it, had the framework in my mind real quick. God just gave it to me. And I said, should I write this now? And the impulse was yes. Like, you have to write this right now. There's no other time. You have to write it now. And so I began that day writing the garden, finished January 8th. And here would be,
wow.
I wrote it real fast. I mean, God just flowed through me. And when you read it, you're going to be like, wow, there's so much truth in this. I am not that smart. I am not that good. God wanted this message out there and literally gave me the story, the message, the 5 Ds, the truth. Some of it inspired by Erwin McManus and his teachings that he has taught me over the years. Derwin Gray, I reached out to him. Tell me about the tree of life in the garden. He explained what the tree of life meant. So they were really instrumental in writing this book. But besides that, God gave me all these different truths in that story. And for it to come out now, when people are struggling with fear and stress and anxiety, when we see the 5 Ds wreaking havoc, we see division greater than ever. Can I share the 5 Ds right now? I think
please go ahead. I was just going to ask you about them.
Yeah, it's probably important to share what they are so we can understand. And the first D is doubt. The enemy plants seeds of doubt that God can't be trusted, that God is withholding the best from you. The serpent said to Eve, did God really say that you couldn't eat from all the trees in the garden? No, God said you couldn't eat from the one tree, but the enemy was planting doubt that God was withholding and you couldn't eat from that one tree. And so it's amazing how the enemy will do that to us, will cause us to focus on not what we have, but what we lack. Here, God provided abundance, all the trees, and the serpent and the enemy was able to get them to focus on the one tree they couldn't eat from. Yep. And so it happens so often, doubt. Second D is distortion. The enemy basically distorts truth with lies. He speaks lies to us. He is known as the father of lies. And so we can see these lies playing out in so many different ways, in so many different directions right now. And so the enemy is always lying to us. Why? Because he wants to discourage us. He knows he can't beat us himself. So what does he do? He gets us to beat ourselves. We don't give up because it's hard. We give up because we get discouraged. And so the enemy is always trying to discourage us. And there's a lot of people right now that are feeling discouraged. During this pandemic, we know, unfortunately, that more and more people have given up their lives. They've literally given up their lives and committed suicide. The numbers have been skyrocketing compared to where they were last year. And so you could see the enemy doing that, creating a feeling of hopelessness and discouragement. And the fourth thing is distractions. Think about that. Distractions. They're the enemy of greatness. The fruit was appealing, Steve. It was a distraction. And so often we get distracted by the media, by all the negative news in the media, all the negative things happening in the world. And right now there's a lot of distractions. One thing after another with the racial tension going on and the protests and so forth. And again, I believe it's all for good. Like, all these things are coming up for a reason. We need to discuss them. We need to grow from them. We need to heal from them. But you could also see how the enemy is basically taking all these situations and then causing a division in our country. And the more people take the bait of hate, they feel more divided than ever. And so distractions are really something that affect us. And then there's the fifth day. When you go through these other 4 Ds, it leads to the fifth day. Once they ate the fruit, because of the doubt and the distortion and the discouragement and the distraction, when Eve ate it and Adam ate it, what happened? They were divided. They were separated from God. And the enemy lies to us ultimately so that we will believe his lies. And if he can plant seeds of doubt, then we'll believe his lies instead of trusting in God. See, he knows if we don't trust in God, we'll believe his lies. So when we eat the fruit, when we take the bait, when we believe the lies, what happens is we now are separated from God. And the word anxious literally means divided. And so many people right now are feeling anxious. They are separated. They feel divided from God, from their power source. And so that 50 is where we are now separated from ourselves, from God, and from each other. Think about it. Social isolation, right? Social distancing. Yeah. So many people are now separate from the people they love, from their friends. We feel more isolated than ever. You can see how these 5Ds are playing out. But I want to give the hope. I want to give the encouragement. We know that love wins, right? And through Jesus, right, instead of doubt, we trust. Yeah. We trust in God. We trust in his plan for our life. We trust in him more than our circumstances. And that's where real faith comes in. Instead of distortion lies, we speak truth to the lies. So don't believe the lies, speak truth to the lies. And we believe that truth, we know that truth, we walk in that truth and power. I always talk about talking to yourself instead of listening to yourself, right? Don't listen to the negative thoughts. Don't listen to the fear. Don't listen to the lies. Instead, speak truth to the lies. And that's what Jesus did in the wilderness. He gave us a blueprint thousands of years ago. He showed us what to do when the enemy tries to tempt us and speak lies to us. What you do is you share the word. It is written. It is written. It is written. So we have to speak truth to the lies. Instead of the discouragement, right? We encourage. And the word encourage means to put courage into. Yes. We need to put courage into ourselves. We need to put courage into others. So speak truth and encourage yourself on this journey. Truett Cathy said, how do you know if a man or a woman needs encouragement? If they're breathing. We all need encouragement, right? So let's encourage. And then instead of distractions, let's focus on what matters most. Let's get back to that. My newsletter today was about just doing one thing. Like do one thing. Instead of arguing online, instead of debating, just pick one thing you're going to do to be part of the solution. Don't be a part of the pollution. Speak noise, right? Words of discouragement, negativity. No, speak truth and be a part of the solution. Help others. What's going to be your one thing? For me, it's education. I know I want to invest in education. I've been doing it already. Josh McCown and I and Anthony Barr, we actually helped fund an after-school program in the Bronx. I just took Lecrae's challenge to invest in peace prep here in Atlanta. I know you did as well.
Yeah.
I want to be part of the solution, right? One thing. Is that everything? No. Are there other things I can do? Yes. Will I do other things? You bet. Create awareness. But I'm going to focus on really one core thing. And I know for me, it's education. Other people need to focus on criminal justice reform. Those who have a law background, who are big in policy and have the ability to influence policy, they might want to focus on that. Other people are going to volunteer. Other people are going to engage and create meaningful conversations. Our friend Emmanuel Acho, right? What he has done to create the conversation, to provide the video, an incredible conversation starter, impacting many. You don't have to do something big. Just focus on one thing. So what matters most? Relationships. And doing that one thing, and love. Jesus tells us to love, which I saw your newsletter today, which was great, Jason, right? Yeah. Love your neighbor, love others. My faith says to love my neighbor. It doesn't say to love only the neighbors who are just like me, right? We have to love our neighbor, focus on what matters most. When you do that, everything else is a distraction and you realize that it doesn't matter. Let's get back to what matters most. And then finally, instead of division, we unite. And that's what Jesus did. He came to unite us back to the Father. What happened in the garden gets reconciled on the cross. And I just love this book and this message. And I love the story because you can see how both stories fit together, the Old Testament and the New Testament. Having grown up Jewish, I'm 98% actually Ashkenazi Jew. I just found that out not too long ago on 23andMe. Biological father was Jewish, mom was Jewish, raised by my New York City police officer, Italian stepfather who raised me. So I have a lot of Italian culture in me, but yeah, I'm like 100, almost like 98% Jewish. That story of the Old Testament in Genesis of Adam and Eve, right? Basically being separated from God. Then we find out through Jesus hanging on the cross, we are now reconciled back to God. And so what happened in the garden gets redeemed, gets restored on the cross. And that's the incredible, magical, amazing, mysterious, powerful part of these stories, how well they fit together. It was almost like God created or something. It's almost like God was in control of it all, which clearly he was, because when you see how it plays out, it's amazing. So you can now see the battle. You can understand how the battle is being waged, the 5 Ds, and then you know the answer to the battle. And once you know that the enemy has a battle and has a plan against you, now you can counter it. The problem today, Jason, is so many people are in this battle and they have no idea they're in a battle. So if your enemy knows you're in a battle and you don't, you're going to get crushed. But if you know you're in a battle and you know how the battle is being waged, now you can win it. And that's where Jesus comes in. And I share my faith in this book. It's my first book where in other books, it was subtle undertones. In this book, boom, I'm sharing my faith.
I was going to ask you about that.
I'm sharing the answer.
Yeah.
I'm going all in on this one.
We'll get back to our conversation with Jon Gordon in just a second, but want to tell you a little bit more about our friends at IJM, the International Justice Mission, believing every person deserves to be safe and free from violence. And by partnering with local authorities to rescue these victims of violence, bring criminals to justice, restore survivors, and strengthen justice systems, IJM is helping to protect more than 150 million people from violence across the world. International Justice Mission. They need your help. They cannot do this work alone. They need help of freedom partners like you and I, some of IJM's most loyal partners in the work of justice, and their support of $24 or more each month helps survivors of slavery and violence from the moment they're rescued until they're fully restored. If you want to join the fight to end slavery in our lifetime, yes, it still exists and it's still a huge problem. You can visit the website ijm.org/TF, ijm.org/TF to become a freedom partner today. Now back to our conversation with Jon Gordon, best-selling author and speaker, joining us here today on Sports Spectrum. That's something that you had to be thinking about when you were writing this. Like, okay, this is going to be, because you write, it says a spiritual fable. So there's no hiding behind the fact that you're going to talk about God and Jesus here.
Well, you can be spiritual, not talking about Jesus, but
Also true.
Yeah, I did know that this is the first time I'm talking about Jesus in a book, and I didn't have a choice. I had to share the answer. I had to share how we win the battle. When you see kids that are killing themselves and so many filled with anxiety and fear and stress, and you know the answer, then you have to share that solution. You have to share that answer. It's like if the doctor had a cure for cancer and didn't share it, right? Think about what that doctor would feel like at the end of their life. For me, if I didn't share it, then I would not be sharing the truth that needed to be shared. And yes, I'm going to admit it was hard. And I thought to myself, like, this is really putting myself out there in a very vulnerable way, because a lot of my books are read by a lot of businesses, a lot of organizations. And so I do need to let people know that this book is different. So I actually put a warning in the introduction. Warning, this is not like my other fables. This is a spiritual fable. This is rooted in my faith tradition. And even at the end, I say, hey, you don't have to be of my faith tradition to find this book beneficial. That if you can use these 5 Ds and understand them and teach them, which I've actually taught these 5 Ds in a secular way and for secular audiences without explaining the spiritual part of it, and it still helps people, then great. But here's my truth. Here is, I believe, the truth, and I'm sharing the power behind it. So yeah, it was definitely a stretch. It's definitely a leap. I may lose, business because of it, but at the same time, at this point in my journey, I know that I have to share this, and I know this book is going to help a lot of people. And when I've heard, I've had several pastors read it, and I've heard from them that they said, wow, we think that this book is going to really bring millions to Christ and really impact millions. If I can do that and people read this and share this story and it helps, then I know that's why I was meant to write it.
It's worth way more than any money you'll ever make from a secular book. If you can tell 5 people, hey, you're going to be able to spend eternity in heaven. I mean, that's worth writing the book just for 1 or 2 or 5 people, Jon Gordon. That's wonderful. Let me ask you about.
You have to be willing to make the stand. I think that's the key. You have to make the stand, because if God has given you everything in your life, if you know he's the power source, if he gives you the books, he gives you the words, he's given you this opportunity to do this work. If you truly know everything is him and your reliance is on him, then when he calls you to write this, if you turn your back on him, if you don't take a stand for him, then you're a fraud. Then your faith isn't real, and you really have basically disowned that God has given you life. And so I had to honor the God who has given me life. My ancestors, the Israelites in the desert, basically, they did not take a stand for God so often, right? Yeah. Very often they did not take a stand. And one of my prayers as I was new in my faith, I only came to faith when I was 35 years old. So I was older. And when I came to faith, one of my prayers was, God, I know my ancestors did not take a stand for you, but I will take a stand for you, God. God, use me to take a stand for you. So I guess that's how I came to write this book.
Well, interestingly enough, my book that's coming out next month is on leadership. You wrote the foreword, and you were so gracious to offer that to the book. And a lot of what I wrote comes from a lot of the principles that you've written about in your books. And believe me, there was temptation there to keep Jesus out of it, in the sense of, hey, I want this book to reach more people. And so if I keep Jesus out of it, or the spiritual side out of it, I can then, reach certain businesses or certain non-Christian whatevers. And then I just kept coming back to, no way can I ever leave Jesus out, because that is who I am. And he's the center of my life. And yes, there are things written in a way that hopefully Christians and non-Christians, and in many ways the same way your books are written, especially the new one, but I had to honor that. So I completely understand that. And not that I'm doing a faith and sports podcast, so maybe people would expect it maybe a little more, but I had to leave it in. I couldn't eliminate his name. I just couldn't. You know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, no, I love it. Right. There's the scripture that talks about that, right? If you honor him, right, he will honor you in heaven before the Father.
If you deny me among men, I will deny you in front of the Father. And I'm thinking, okay, that's about as real as Jesus can get, right?
So here's the deal. Like in my other books, I didn't feel called to do it. So it's not like you have to. Like God was, I think, using me to reach people in the business world. So it did give me exposure to many more businesses as a result of maybe not doing it. But when he calls you and you don't do it, that's when you're in trouble. Like you got
called disobedience.
Yeah. You got to be you got to be obedient. And that's the thing. I've always been obedient to what God wants me to do. My prayer is often, God, use me for your purpose. Mm-hmm. Guide me towards my purpose. And, use me to do your will, God, not my will. And the more I pray that, the more God seems to use me for his will.
He certainly is using you, Jon Gordon. Again, the new book is called The Garden, a spiritual fable about ways to overcome fear, anxiety, and stress, releasing June 30th. Make sure you get it. And then the Relationship Grit book, we're going to have to get you back on with your wife. We were talking about this. That comes out at the end of August. You got 2 books within the span of like 3, but you're like this movie star who has 2 blockbusters coming out within 2 months of each other, Jon.
Well, you read the book with my wife, and I did. Yeah, thanks for reading it. And it's real, right? It's very real.
It's about as raw a book as you can get on marriage, and I loved it, and relationships.
It's very raw. My wife just did the audio book, and there are parts in there when she's like, you need to have sex with your husband. Like it's important that you do that. And the audiobook guy was like, I think people are going to really benefit from this book.
Including my marriage.
Yeah. And we talk about how negative I was and how my wife almost left me early on. And it's the real story. It's like, I've had a lot of friends read it and they said, you come across as very average and your wife comes across as a rock star. And that's the way it should be, because I really think that she is the rock star in our marriage and she kept us strong together. And my brother even said, are you sure you want to put this stuff out there? People are going to really, in many ways, maybe think less of you of who you were early on. Because I was negative and angry a lot and mean. I wasn't abusive, but I definitely was narcissistic and not a good husband. And this is before I found Jesus. And we wanted to tell the whole story because you have to see how Jesus transformed me, how he changed my life and my heart and everything. And so it's not just a marriage book, but it's also about how God moved in our marriage and changed us both, and how Anne Graham Lotz spoke, to my wife one time at an event and spoke into her heart and impacted her. And so together, like relationship grit stands for God. You need to make God the center of your marriage. Resolve, invest, invest in the marriage. And you have to do it together. It can't be just one of you. Both of you have to do it. And we share a framework, but then also share a lot of ideas how to do that and our story. So yeah, I'm excited about that one coming out. It was supposed to come out before The Garden, but because of everything going on, the publisher wanted to share it afterwards, more in August, September. So it's probably a good idea. And again, it's all according to God's timing anyway. But I think it's going to help a lot of marriages. I know some are struggling right now, and if anybody wants to read it, in advance, we're going to do a launch team for that as well, where they'll be able to read it in advance. We'll do that.
Nice. That's awesome. Well, you can find out all that information. JonGordon.com and positiveuniversity.com is where all of your kind of tools are, and you can check it out there. I want to ask you about podcasting and in your show that you do, which I love. And I listen to it whenever you release a new episode, and it's called Positive University Podcast. And you had an interview recently with Doc Rivers, which I thought was really good. And I listened to it, interestingly enough, when I was mowing the lawn, John, just to be quite honest with you. But that one stood out to me. And I think it's interesting because during this time, not just a pandemic and a quarantine time, but you mentioned it, the racial unrest, the tension, the protests that are going on, and talking to a guy like Doc, which I thought was really good. I know you've known him and worked through those, doing great work with the Clippers, but just hearing what he had to say, not only about leadership, but about this time, and listening and trying to learn from him. Tell me about his interview, and then maybe some of the other ones that you've learned about leadership, maybe just from yourself interviewing others during this crazy time.
As you know, when you do a podcast, you learn just as much as you're sharing. Well, actually, you learn a lot more because you're listening the whole time. So,
yes.
So you get to learn so much. I've learned from so many people. It's been really great. The podcast I just started doing is more of as a hobby,
right.
More so just to do some interviews. Everyone was doing it. And the more I started doing it, the more I've actually really enjoyed it. The more I'm learning and growing from it. And so to be able to get like a Matthew McConaughey on, like I had, that was a really cool one to learn from him. And then,
yes.
And then Doc, of course, was amazing. Doc and I did that interview while the helicopters were flying around and everything was going on in LA. I was in Santa Monica at the time, and where everything was happening. And we were literally doing the interview at that time. So it was pretty wild that we're having this incredible conversation about what's going on while I'm in the middle of it. And Doc was just, just the best. I mean, when Doc Rivers is pulled over by cops often, when his house is burned down, when he's being called racial slurs in his life,
yeah.
I mean, you have to understand this is a problem for not just Black athletes, but Black America. And so it really does open your eyes the more you have these conversations. And I think a lot of people don't understand it if they don't listen. They don't understand it if they don't really talk to people who are going through it. They talk about, well, this was 300 years ago. Well, we've changed so much. Well, we have improved so much. Yes, there have been improvements, but there are still issues. Mm-hmm. And you learn so much just by talking to Emmanuel Acho. I mean, we talked the night before he went to film that video, and we just had a great conversation. And he told me some of the things that he shared in that video. And I learned so much from him just in that talk, just as the world has learned from him. So for me, you're learning about what it's like from someone else's perspective, understanding what they're going through, the challenges they face, and then how they lead out of it. And Doc, talking about his communication with his team and how they've been communicating and the one-on-one communication that he has. And he talked about Donald Sterling and some of the things they had to talk about with his team. I love the part where he talked about, hey guys, I'm Glenn Rivers, and I'm not just a coach, but I'm also going through this too, and I'm feeling this as well. And when he was able to just share from a human perspective how it made him feel, then the players opened up and they had this great conversation. And I truly believe if he wasn't the kind of coach that developed a relationship with his players, that had great communication, when the Donald Sterling thing happened, that team would have fell apart because they had such great relationships, great communication. They actually were able to talk through it, become united through it, and then become stronger because of it. Mm-hmm. So he gives the example of a great leader who builds a great team, and he's just amazing as a communicator. So you start to learn from all these different people. PJ Fleck I interviewed, I learned from him, and Mac Brown was just epic. I don't know if you heard Mac's interview, but
yeah,
Mac
he's
Brown,
so good.
Yeah, Mac Brown is just, you're like, okay, after now I know why he's Mac Brown. Now I know why, he builds winners wherever he goes, and still doing it all these years later. And he was the first college team I ever spoke to was in Texas. They brought me in to speak in Texas. Like, I think it was 2009, 2010, the year Colt McCoy was a senior, and they went to the national championship against Alabama. I spoke
and
to
the Acho brothers were there.
That's the Acho brothers, that's where we met. Mm-hmm. They were young guys, came up to me, talked. I'm like, these guys are special. Like, I was like, these guys are special. And then to see what they're doing now, it's just so cool to have these relationships over the years. Now I'm the old guy, right? I was the young guy then. Now I've become the old guy. But yeah, I learned a lot through I've learned a lot through the podcast, and keep learning, right? Keep growing.
Yeah, absolutely. Last question for me. What are you most concerned about right now for you in the society that we're in, as far as leadership goes? What's been most concerning for you as a leader right now and watching other leaders fail and some succeed and doing it right. But what's been the most concerning thing for you as you watch what's kind of happening right now around the country?
The most concerning thing for me is communication, because where there's a void in communication, negativity fills it. So we as leaders need to communicate a whole lot better through this time, through this challenge. Our government leaders, I feel, need to do a better job of really communicating. I would love to have, press conferences each day where they bring the scientists and they talk about, hey, here's the latest science. Here's what we know now according to COVID. It's what we thought then, because a lot of people are actually still living their lives based on the old science, not the new science.
Right.
And we have so much more information now that we know. For instance, transmission outside is very low, like infinitesimal low for transmission outside.
Right.
And yet I still see people running and jogging with masks on. You should not have to run and jog with a mask on when you're outside. The transmission is so low. That's why these rallies and so forth and protests are not creating a lot of spread, because it doesn't happen outside. It's why in the Ozarks, people were all freaked out about what's happening in the Ozarks. It's why it didn't create spread outside. So there is a lot of truths that we know now that would be nice that if there was one body of information shared with everyone and everyone could be on the same page and we all knew the same thing.
Yeah.
And I just feel like there's been this void in communication. So what happens? Everyone's filling it with their own voice, their own way. And what has that done? Create a lot of division and distractions and arguments, because now you're arguing on Twitter and social media with your truth. They're bringing up their data, their information, what they heard 5 months ago. Yeah. And you're like, no, here's the new data. And everyone's arguing. And the negativity
just comes right in.
Yes, there seems to be so many voices instead of just one truth. So here's the deal. Great leaders provide clarity. Clarity leads to focus action. Jesus provided clarity, the greatest leader of all time. You provide clarity. This is what you do. That leads to focus action. So I would love to have more clarity, which would improve our communication and then also lead to focus action. And this includes all of our businesses and everything we do with our organizations.
Yeah, churches too. Absolutely. Jon Gordon, this has been great, my friend. Best-selling author and speaker. And hopefully by the fall, you're back on the road doing your thing. And if not, God's got a plan that's going to take you to amazing other places. And like he's been doing with your new book, The Garden, and the new book coming out at the end of August, Relationship Grip. But The Garden is the one we want you to go get now. Releases June 30th, A Spiritual Fable, Overcoming Fear, Anxiety, and Stress. Book number 22. Come on, Jon Gordon. Keep going, brother. Appreciate you coming on the show, and let's get you back on one. We'll have your wife on with you in a couple months, and we'll dive deeper into marriage. How's that sound?
I'm already scared for that one, Jason, but I'm willing to do it so that the people can hear the truth.
Let me tell you something. If I could get my wife to sit here and listen and do an interview with you, that would be the miracle, because she's the behind the scenes woman. She don't want to be seen anywhere or heard anywhere. But hopefully we'll get you guys back on. And thanks for joining us, my friend.
Hey, thanks, Jason. God bless.
And many thanks to Jon Gordon, best-selling author and speaker, for joining us here today on Sports Spectrum. I love his stuff. I mean, everything he writes, I read, and I'm always encouraged by it. He's one of my favorite authors. He's also one of my favorite people, and I'm honored and privileged to have him as a friend and not just a person who consumes his content. And Jon is a great dude. He's the real deal. We spent a couple minutes after our recording just talking, and he's just an encourager. He's a professional encourager, and I love that about Jon. Get the new book. It's called The Garden, A Spiritual Fable About Ways to Overcome Fear, Anxiety, and Stress. It's perfect timing for this book, and it releases June 30th. I know it's going to be a bestseller. You got to go pick it up. It's available for pre-order right now, and it releases, like I said, June 30th, The Garden. Go get it. And Jon's got so many other great places where you can consume his content. His website, jongordon.com. His other website, positiveuniversity.com. And then, of course, the podcast he hosts, the Positive University Podcast, available everywhere podcasts are found. Jon Gordon, really appreciate him for joining us here today on Sports Spectrum. We also appreciate our sponsors, IJM, the International Justice Mission. Check them out at ijm.org/TF. Become a freedom partner and join that fight with IJM to end slavery in our lifetime. ijm.org/TF. Again, we really do appreciate it when you click that subscribe button or that play button or that download button to listen to this podcast. It means so much to us, and we're grateful to have you as listeners to Sports Spectrum. Click that subscribe button because that way you never miss an episode of Sports Spectrum's podcast. Tons of content out there. John's been on a couple times before this, so you can learn more about his journey to faith on a couple previous episodes of Sports Spectrum. Just search Jon Gordon and Sports Spectrum there. And obviously there's tons of content that we put out every day. You can go to the website, sportspectrum.com. That has every single podcast. It has a devotional that you can start every morning with right there for 5 minutes, basically, maybe even less than that, on the website, sportspectrum.com. And then we have content all day long, articles, stories on the intersection of sports, intersecting with faith in Jesus Christ. Check it all out at sportspectrum.com. Thank you again for tuning in, and I hope you'll join us next time right here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. My name is Jason Romano, and we'll see you next time. Have a great rest of your day.